Welcome back. The move by the federal government to establish two new academic unions, the Congress of Nigerian University Academics, Conua, and the National Association of Medical and Dental Academics, Namda, has continued to generate criticisms. This comes shortly after the Minister of Labour and Employment, Chris Ngige, presented certificates of registration to both unions on Tuesday. During the presentation, the minister said the unions have been officially gazetted, hence entitled to all labor rights as enshrined in the International Trade Unions Constitution, while adducing that both unions came into being to unbundle Asuu. Addressing newsmen in his office after the presentation, Ngige said the alleged lack of democracy, transparency and failure to render a proper account of check-off dues by Asuu culminated in grievances that spurred the federal government to consider the registration of Conua and Namda. Meanwhile, President of Conua, Ni Sumonu, said that the high-handedness of Asu's leadership gave birth to the association, stressing that the era of incessant strikes in the university system was over. Asuu recently suspended its 8-month strike over alleged discrepancies in welfare and order remunerations. The body has maintained its differences with the federal government. Well, right now, Oriyomi Ogunwale, co-founder, EduPlanner, joins me to speak on the rationale of the establishment of these institutions by the federal government. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, the Labour Minister, Chris Ngige, he says the move to establish these two academic unions would help liberalize the academic subsector and also allow for freedom for university workers. Do you believe his statement?
I think this is another square peg in a round hole, in the sense that you expect the federal government to address the issues on ground, which are some of the issues that the Asuu has been raising for years now. But rather than address Asuu issues, the federal government has now gone the way of recognizing Conua, which I think now poses a grave danger to education in Nigeria. And what you see that the federal government is doing now is that it's using a divide and conquer rule, which means that if tomorrow universities are facing issues, for example, that means if Asuu recognizes these issues, Conua can also pick it up also. And the federal government has to deal with two different unions on their own. And that means if you satisfy one union, you cannot meet the other union, then that means you have not resolved the issues, which means that our universities will now be having one part of lecturers saying, we have been satisfied, we can go ahead with lectures. And some others saying, oh, we have not been satisfied. The people who suffer the most for this are students. And it also comes back to what you look at in terms of the federal government, for example. This administration is going to be leaving office by May or June of 2023, which is this year. Now it is laying precedents down for the next administration to actually say that this is the way you can go in terms of dealing with Asuu. These are not ways you can deal with university issues, for example. These are ways for you to deflect. We've not heard anything about universities. We've not heard anything about their demands. What we are seeing now is power play, which was what resulted in the Asuu strike that lasted for 8 months last year, for example, which is the second largest Asuu strike in Nigeria, for example. And now with adding Conua to the picture now, what it means is that whenever the next strike, for example, will happen, that means we are looking at the mother of all strikes, because what you'll be having is back and forth, because there is no one leadership that you can say, oh, this is the only leadership we are addressing. And once we can meet at the middle point, then we've addressed all the issues and the strike can be called off. It means you need to satisfy Asuu and you need to satisfy Conua, which is a very, very bad precedent for what we are looking at, for example.
Well, just like you said, many also believe that the government has ulterior motives, like, distracting Asuu from its struggles and probably reopening the universities without fulfilling the union's demands. Now, do you think this is the case?
In terms of meeting the union's demands, right?
Yes. Exactly, in terms of
The
meeting
federal
Asu's demands.
the federal government, especially this administration, has from its investment trend, for example, in the education sector, what you discover is it has not prioritized education. I think that's a verdict from us here, for example, because we had less than 10% of the budget that was allocated to education. And that does not mean that is the amount that is released. But looking at ASU, for example, the union, for example, and which is part of our advocacy during the strike last year in terms of saying that the ASU itself also should address the public more about what is happening. We don't even know what is happening at the moment in terms of the negotiation, the ongoing negotiation, in terms of different demands that the union is raising. And this is a way for the government to now say we have a higher hand over you because we are no longer discussing with ASU, we are discussing with Conua. And this sort of confusion, this sort of divide and conquer tactics will only mean that universities are going to stay a long time before they address their issues. And which is also what gives birth to us saying that if the federal government is not ready to actually meet the demands of ASU, or okay, we are bringing Conua now, they should allow universities to have autonomy to manage their own affairs themselves. Then that way we can begin to say what is the state of university education in Nigeria and how do we address them so that students on the long run can actually um, enjoy quality education, especially at the tertiary level. Because what you see is that we keep playing with the lives of young Nigerians, with the lives of the youth, for example. And instead of addressing these issues, we have now made it even worse by saying we want to recognize Conua. And that means we are looking at, I won't be shocked if we have another university strike this year.
You talked about the mother of all strikes, and the unions already have branches in some universities in the country. Do you see the same fate as the continuous industrial actions that befall ASU? Do you see it affecting or happening to Conua and Namda? Do you think the newly registered unions will last?
Um, I think first and first, Namda is for the health sector, which is doctors, for example. So I think more of we're looking at the education sector and universities. So when you look at Conua, for example, even for ASU, when you look at how ASU comes up with a final decision when it comes to calling off the strike, for example, what you discover is there's a lot of demands. You have to look at the Uniben chapter of ASU, you have to look at the OAU chapter of ASU. These are strong bodies and they make their demands, they make their things known even to the National Secretariat of ASU to say this is what we want, these are the demands. Unless this is done, we don't think we will agree to calling off the strike. And there needs to be a middle point before every party can come together and say, okay, let us all agree to call off the strike while we look at what the government is going to do in the nearest future. But now the whole process has now become more complicated in the sense that Conua has branches in few universities as of now, for example. But well, maybe in the nearest months or before the end of the year, they might have more chapters in other universities. And you need to look at the basis for Conua coming together was that ASU high-handedness, or they are not being given their own remuneration, or the fact that their voices are not being heard even within ASU, or their members being suspended. And those are some of the reasons why Conua is coming together, which for me, I don't see it as enough reasons for them to now say we want to form another body that is parallel to ASU. And also the sense that the federal government has now gazetted them, for example, say every other power of any labor union can also be recognized Conua. Now, what that means on the long run is if we have a strike, for example, the university system, the university environment is now very, very divided because there will be one part for ASU, there will be one part for Conua. So you can have some certain type of lecturer saying, we are going to resume academic activities because we have been addressed. And then another part will say, we have not been addressed, we have not been attended to, so we cannot. So students suffer, and this divided community does not bode well for
All
the
right, now
future.
away from
And
the
I
strike
think it's
action, sorry to cut you here. Away from the strike action, human rights activist Femi Falana says the labor laws in Nigeria, do not permit the registration of more than one union in a sector. But the Labor Minister Chris Ngige doesn't, he thinks otherwise. Briefly before I let you go, do you think this case has a fighting chance in courts in the event that it gets to that point?
yes, I think I would love, I'm not a lawyer, right? But I would love if it has that fighting chance. Because like I've mentioned on this call, it's a divided house, it's a divided community, and it's not good for the future of university education in Nigeria. So I'm hopeful that we can find a way around this and actually ensure that only one union body is recognized, especially at university level, and we can have a united house that wants to engage the federal government on university issues in Nigeria.
All right, now, Oriyomi Ogunwale, co-founder, EduPlanner, thank you for your time and contribution. Well, that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I am Mary Kanu. Bye for now.